the TTS Talking Early Years podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years. To hear about future episodes and access follow-up content, including ideas for your settings and more, sign up for exclusive access using the link in the podcast description. Hi everybody, welcome back to our podcast. We continue to explore the magic of play-based learning in the early years. When somebody asks me what is it that I do, I say I lecture, I write, but my favourite thing to say is I'm an imagineer, because I make up things all the time. It's all about imagination for me. And today I am delighted that we are joined by Simon Airey, and I can't wait for Simon to tell us all about him, and then we'll have a chat.
Thanks, Alice. It's good, really good to be here. Just a little bit about myself. First of all, I've been teaching for 23 years, and those 23 years have been a mixture of teaching EYFS all the way up to year 4. I've also been a supply teacher, which I'm currently doing at the moment. I've also worked in specialist provision as well, mainly focusing on teaching children with autism. I've also been an early years lead as well, and with a focus on focusing on improving inside and outside provision. I did that for 4 years, and it was a really enjoyable experience. I'm very passionate about taking the EYFS approach beyond early years and making sure that elements of that are introduced into Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2.
Fantastic, that's brilliant. Well, we're going to have a great conversation then, Simon, because your background is incredibly similar to my background. So, wow. Okay, so a great warm welcome to the podcast. I hope our conversation interests everybody that decides to listen. So, to start us off, from picking up a phone and pretending to call somebody, or choosing to use a stick as a wand or a tennis racket, role play. Role play is of huge benefit to expanding the language and communication skills of our children. I wonder, Simon, why do you think role play is so vital for us in the early years?
I think for children, even if children are as young as 2, which are the youngest I've worked with, the children come into the setting with a wealth of experience that they've had outside the school, outside the setting, and they're very eager to come in and talk about if they've been to the park, if they've played with something particular at home, if they've watched something, or they may have been somewhere. And I think for us, it's our job as practitioners to listen intently to what the children are saying, and then using what they've spoken about in order to provide some kind of link between their experience and what we provide for them in the setting. And that could be something as person as I went to the shop and I bought something with my parent, and then providing something within our setting that reflects that experience.
Yeah. And I think that's something, we start with the child, we don't start with the curriculum. So the curriculum can tell us that we should be using role play as an offer when our children come in, but ignoring what they already have and that knowledge they've already gathered from those experiences that they have out with our setting is just madness, isn't it? And I guess if you look at role play in its biggest sense, what does role play actually mean? It means to act out or to perform, to take part, and to take on the persona of a character or a person that's not you, and some of the research out there tells us about role play, that there's occupational role play, so that's when we might think about being a doctor or a builder or a farmer or a fisherman. There's fantasy role play, so that's when we become obsessed at 2, 3, 4 with unicorns, dinosaurs and superheroes. And then that real life that you've just spoken about, Simon, going to the shop or the park or the library or camping or construction. We walk past the construction site. So I'm wondering, if we encourage our children to take on occupational fantasy or real life role play situations, how does that impact on their language development?
I think the best examples I can think of is if the practitioners within the setting spark the children's imagination through a story or some kind of video clip or dressing up as a character, and using the text and the language contained within the text in order to get the children enthused and feeling imaginative and being confident enough to implement their own thoughts and ideas within their play afterwards. I think the practitioners need to have a really good understanding of when the children are communicating with us, whether it's through spoken language, through gesture, through pointing, through use of technology. We then consider what it is that they're telling us, and then we build that into different types of role play as you described. And I also think the role play can be sort of all big and all dancing, is like a big sort of like home corner type type way, or it could be like a smaller scale tabletop role play, such as a shop or a library, as you mentioned earlier. I think the key is that the adults working with the children, they need to have a really good understanding of the language that the children are using, and then what we can do in order to move and develop that language further.
Yeah, because I guess if we go to the fantasy role play, when it's not about an experience the child has brought to the nursery. So, they might know a farmer, or they might live on a farm, or, their dad might be a builder, or there's a doctor in the family. So they've got those experiences from the occupational type role play situations. But the fantasy role play is really challenging for some children, because if one of the children in the 3 to 4 year old's room starts talking about superheroes or unicorns because they have an experience of that, and we haven't read the story, or we haven't got the resources there to support that, then our role as the adult then becomes massive. Because if you think about the language, when you're talking about being a doctor or a farmer, it's incredibly different vocabulary to being a unicorn or a dinosaur. And I'm wondering what the benefits of the different kinds of role play are, Simon. Instead of just being a farmer or a dog or a cat, which live in my house, to being a unicorn or a dinosaur, how is that going to elevate my language development, do you think?
I think the more open-ended the role play provision is, then I think you've got a greater chance of having of enhancing the children's language. So rather than having a set area, so at the start of the year you might decide home corner because that's a familiar setting for the children. I think the more different things you have in there, the more sort of things you have to spark curiosity, whether it's through a costume, an object, a piece of furniture, or some kind of invitation within that sort of play. It can be simple as, if it's a home corner, can you create a shopping list because the fridge is empty, for example? So that's giving a purpose to the role play. And it's thinking about, if they haven't experienced something like unicorn or the other examples that you gave, what can we do in the role as the adult, provide scaffolding for those children so that they become familiar with what they are, how they could possibly act, but also at the same time it's valuing what the children bring to it. So the children may, for example, put a superhero costume on and decide that the superhero is going to do this today. It might be completely not what we think they might do, but it's going with it. It's going with it, and it's almost acting on gut instinct and impulse with what the children are bringing to you, which can be quite daunting, I think.
And overwhelming for some practitioners. I can remember when I went to teacher training college, in fact, and I was a drama specialist, and so I loved role play and anything to do with drama, but there was a technique called teacher in role. And we were encouraged to take on the role of the character that the child talked about, and which was fine. I was happy to be a bumblebee or pretend to be a tree or whatever. But then I can remember being sent on a course about it, and during the training and the course, I had to pretend to be the black key on a piano while my friend was the white key. And then I had to pretend to be an ice cube and she was a Coke that was pouring into the glass, and how would I move as an ice cube? And I think sometimes those kind of experiences as a practitioner completely put you off. And looking at both of us will have experienced phenomenally fantastic situations where role play has enhanced and enriched the language, and we've scaffolded, as you suggested, back the way. But what about the practitioner who is lacking in confidence, that they're not, they don't want to look silly in front of their peers? Is there anything that you could suggest would help build that confidence for that practitioner, do you think?
I think it's about utilising the practice within the team, because there's bound to be, I think, someone within that team who I would say is more sort of extroverted, more willing to take on that sort of dramatic role. And I think the children respond really well to that. I mean, I personally, I'm quite introverted naturally, but when I'm teaching, it changes because the audience are the children. The children deserve the best that you've got to offer. I think that the adult who maybe is less confident maybe sort of tries it within that the continuous provision first of all, because then you're not on show, as it were. Yeah. However, I mean, I've done it when I've had lesson observations, when I've had Ofsted looking in, and just part of everyday practice. If it fits, particularly at the start of a unit, when you're introducing a story, I find that if you decide to take the role play approach, if you're doing it with somebody else, that really helps. So I used to do it with myself and if I had a teaching assistant at the time, we would sort of assign roles to each other so that the children saw the partnership with the adults that they had.
And that's really powerful, isn't it, Simon? That building confidence with another person. And it shows the children brilliantly that role play is about collaboration. It's very unusual to play someone different or become a unicorn or become a superhero unless you're in the dream part of the imagination. But the reality is that it's usually with someone else. And so how empowering for that practitioner to work with another adult to build their confidence. And I think team teaching, I guess you could call it, I think we don't do enough of that. So I think that's a really good thing for the listeners to think about. If there is an area of their expertise, whether it be in role play or any other kind of play, that they feel less confident about, it might be to look to a staff member that is more confident in that aspect and ask, could we do this together? I think assigning roles, as you suggested, just what a lovely way to build confidence in our staff. That's fab. And go back to the home corner that you talked about, and or any of the situations that we've mentioned so far, as well as language development, the skills that are going to come out of pretending to be a farmer are very different to me pretending to be a superhero or to build in a construction site or be in my home corner. But what about, you mentioned continuous provision, and I want to pick that apart perhaps later, but just before we leave this little conversation, I wonder about the enhancement of that. Sometimes the home corner, I'm very particular about the home corner. I never change it into being anything else because a lot of my children need a home corner, so it never becomes dinosaur land or anything else for role play. I would do role play elsewhere, but that's me personally. But I would often introduce a chandelier or a candelabra, or instead of saying we're having lunch today, we'll have a banquet today. How do you feel about the adult injecting their own ideas? Simon, do you think it's important that there's a bit of that, or not too much of it?
I think as adults, practitioners, we sometimes have the approach that we're providing for the children. So we're providing this sort of exquisite home corner or this wonderfully created dinosaur land, when actually the children will tell us through their play how much they like it or how much they want to alter it, because quite often our sort of vision of how it should look and how it will provide for language is actually in reality quite different to what the children do with it. So I've done the approach where I've had a blank home corner, and that the sort of art focus for that particular week may have been, we're going to be designing like the wallpaper, we're going to be designing the whatever to go in the home corner. So it's really utilising the children's knowledge and interest, because children will come with different experiences. I think also that children will, through their play, they will give us very distinct clues about what the play skills are like, and also us as practitioners need to think literally at the end of each day, right, within this particular part of the provision, the children were doing this. So if they're, for example, if they were cooking, thinking about, are the resources that we have in there, are they reflective of the cohort that we have, which I think we may be talking about a little bit later. But I think in summary, it's a balance between, I think the adults sort of, they have the sort of idea when they're talking about and planning, but you need to be extremely receptive of what the children bring to it, because if you can show that you've listened to the child, as they might have said, they might have pointed to a particular item. If the next day that's there, or you've done something with it, that's immediately going to spark that child, and it's going to say to that child that they feel listened to.
Yeah, and I think that's a lovely way to round up this little conversation. You talked about observing and noticing the children's responses. And I think sometimes as practitioners we can be a bit precious or over-precious about the time and energy we've spent creating a catalyst for children to respond to. And it's really important. You talked about altering the children, altering their own space. It is their space, it's not our space. So I think that's a lovely way to look on it. The organic way we allow children to modify and respond, whether it be in occupational role play, fantasy role play, or real life role play situations. Wow, thank you so much, Simon. My head is a buzz. That was fab. Role play is important, and oh my goodness me, I can't wait to do it again.
Thank you, definitely. Really interesting discussion so far.
A huge thank you to our guest Simon for joining us and providing us with such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alice Sharp, and Simon Airey. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive content.